Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Our topic tonight is going to be on planning with AP Insight, mostly addressing unit plans that incorporate instruction and assessment, but also looking at the full year plan and sort of what considerations you might want to keep in mind as you're thinking through like the units from like a holistic perspective, right? So we'll get into some detail with one unit, but then we'll also make sure we sort of answer some questions that might be worth considering for a full year. We did the pre-meeting polls, so thank you for answering those. Okay, so I'm going to I think I can make this full screen. See if this helps. And we can look at the chat box every now and then, but this will kind of help to see what all the components are that we're looking at. So the strategy, I'm sorry, I just want to do a quick reminder here that we have the other sessions from our webinar series are posted onto AP Insight. So I'm going to show you quickly where those are. And this session is also being recorded, so you'll be able to revisit this in the same location later if you want. So if we refer to anything here that as having been like addressed in a previous session, then now you'll know where to go. So on the main page, there's a tab at the top that says strategies, and when you click there, it pulls up the page that we see here, and you can select connect via the PLC webinar series there, and it brings up a separate page, and that's of course where you can see the different recordings, and we'll be adding this one I believe tomorrow. So that's just a reminder there, and we are joined by a couple of our AP Insight consultants. So you guys were chatting earlier with Peter. He's going to be our facilitator for the evening. Peter he posted his info in the chat box. I'll revisit that real quickly here. From Lower Marion, Pennsylvania, and he's been teaching AP Calculus for many years. I won't say how many, but he's
posted. So
there it is. You're right.
I gave it up already.
Yeah, it's out there. Can't take it back now. So Peter is very experienced not only with the course, but also as a consultant for AP Insight. He has trained and worked with other teachers to incorporate these resources into his school. I think Daniel's had some trouble joining us, so I'm going to check on that in a minute. But Daniel is also a AP Calculus teacher and a consultant. And I'm Tiffany Judkins. I'm from the College Board. I'm their Director of AP Instructional Design for the Mathematics AP courses, so that I was involved with the development of the resources and the committee that worked on it, including Monique, who I think Aaron said he works with. So I'm glad that she's encouraging folks to join our webinars and things, because it's just there's a lot of great resources. I think there was one other thing I wanted to mention. Nope, I guess not. I think now I can hand it over to Peter. Quick question: when I said I went into full screen mode, could you guys see the slides get really big, or was that just me? Peter, did you see the slides get really, like when I click this, do you see the screen change?
No, my screen stayed the same.
Oh, I see. Okay, so it's an individual thing. So guys, if you want to see the slides larger, I believe there's probably a selection near the top of the slide pod there that looks like arrows, and the arrows sort of expand your view, so you can see that, and then you can unexpand it and go back to the main view. So I just wanted to give you guys some options if you feel like it's difficult to read from that size. Okay, so Peter, why don't you go ahead and start us off with the next slide, and I believe that's the agenda. Yeah.
Okay, hi. I'm Peter Ketchmar. I guess as I said in the chat room, I've been doing this for about 20 years, and I piloted AP Insight this year in a district, and it was we got one special insight class, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Something different about that group as a whole, the kind of students we recruited. But for tonight, right, here's the agenda. We all know that an issue we all face is that there's simply never enough time. So what we're going to focus on today is we're going to take a look at what it might be like to plan ahead for even just a single unit, and the kind of things you might want to consider as you start reviewing for the AP exam and thinking about the plan for next school year. So here's the agenda for the evening. From 7 to 8, we'll recap the notion of formative assessments in AP Insight. We'll take a look at a sample unit in the pacing calendar, then the different components, the building blocks, the challenge area, and the student reflections. Then we'll look at what it looks like to plan for the entire school year using the topic translation and some other planning considerations. So here it is. Here's what we're going to do. So let's get started. Okay, and in the end, of course, we'll have a question and answer and a discussion, chance to bat around some ideas or answer any concerns or questions you might have. All right, so we're going to review the AP Insight model and see how it uses formative assessment to close gaps for kids. So what is AP Insight? Well, it's a platform that provides instructional resources and assessments for learnings. In terms of instructional resources, it provides focused support on challenge areas that are foundational to college level achievement, yet thought to be hard to teach or difficult to learn. Notice that this means AP Insight is not comprehensive. There are resources, there are topic areas that are the resources are designed to target specific topic areas critical to the course. So things like differential equations, for example, separation of variables may not show up. So we're looking at just a number of challenge areas, those that folks think are difficult to teach and hard for kids to learn. In terms of assessment for learning, what this means that they're designed to target specific misunderstandings and to give feedback to guide kids to next steps. In other words, it's not a summative assessment like the AP exam. That exam tells us what students have mastered at the end of the course. It's not designed to show or unpack those precise misunderstandings students may have struggled with. But once students take the test, there's nothing for them at that point after the AP exam to do about it. They either know it or they don't. The assessments in AP Insight, even the end of the unit ones, are formative in nature in that they tell students how they're doing during the instructional cycle and provide for next steps for intervention. In other words, it's not just about here's an activity or here's a quiz, we'll grade it and flip it back to you. It's a feedback loop. That's why in this four-stage model, there's an assess stage, excuse me, followed by an act stage. These formative assessments come in two formats, right? They come as building block quizzes and challenge area assessments. What we're going to do today is take a little bit of a closer look at how to design a unit plan that incorporates some of those critical elements in this cycle, from instruction to assessment to feedback. Okay, what we're going to do now is walk through an example of a pacing calendar for an upcoming challenge area, namely area and volume. And I'm guessing if you're doing an AB course, you might be about there right now, or maybe just finished it, or maybe just starting it in next week or so. Okay, so how do we access the unit planning calendar? From your home screen, if you click on Strategies, it's in the upper right-hand corner near the top, and scroll down to plan your units. That's down there at the bottom. You'll see that there is both a sample unit planning calendar, and we're going to walk through that together. But you'll see that there's also a blank unit planning calendar. Both of these are available for download on the site, and we've provided some direct links below on your screen. All right. All right, now let's just take a minute to take a look at some of the notes you'll see on the planning template. These are the things that we should be keeping in mind as we consider planning a unit with AP Insight resources. The instructions prompt us to think not only about how we'll teach it, which is usually already somewhere on our radar screen, but also how we will begin to assess what we've taught. Since AP Insight uses a formative assessment approach, the idea here is that we would want to assess student understanding at different touch points throughout the unit to capture student misunderstandings before we get further along. So we'll want to patch those holes before we move on. And remember that leaving time to review those items and possibly revisit the topics again is really important for addressing misconceptions revealed by those assessments. All right, what you'll see in the sample is that the different colors are being used to indicate different components. You got black for instruction, purple for performance tasks, red for assessments, and blue for reflection. This isn't necessarily something you need to do, of course, but we wanted to show an example that really calls out how each component has been built in. Here we're looking at a unit overview. There it is. Here we're looking at a unit overview. And what we'll do is we'll zoom in and look at each individual component. But now, for now, just take a look and notice that we've got some things that are represented by each one of the colors in our key. Okay, so just a reminder, instruction is where your normal teaching would happen. Also remember that this is just how one teacher did it. It's meant to just show us one concrete example about how it could be done, and to give us a point of reference for the general principles we'll want to keep in mind as we proceed. Now, let's take a look at week 1. You can see it there atop the screen. The black text is where the instruction happens. So of course, that's where we start off. Here the teacher is essentially presenting his or her regular lesson and examples that demonstrates how to calculate area with vertical slices. Okay. So the next day, March 28th, is when students work on a performance task. Oh, let me flip back one, too fast. Here's where students work on a performance task that address the content discussed on the previous day. Notice that the BBA refers to building block A. Since those are designed to take about 45 minutes, sometimes less, the teacher can plan to use the last 10 minutes of the class presenting a mini lesson on horizontal slices or problems that can be done either way. Next day, the 29th. On the next day, students engage in another performance task, this time on problems that could be done with horizontal or vertical slices. BB refers again to building block B, and here we see our first reflection component. This is where the teacher plans to pause for a couple of minutes and have kids actively reflect on the two performance tasks and what they've done. For instance, the teacher could ask what questions they have, or where they encountered struggles, or what discoveries, conclusions they made along the way. Moving on to the next day, on 3:30, March 30th. On the following day, the teacher assigns two quizzes, one for building block A and one for building block B, the content that had been addressed in the previous lessons and performance tests. These quizzes are 5 multiple choice questions, and they're designed to take about 10 or 15 minutes or so, and to immediately address what students got wrong. The teacher includes a reflection piece at the end of the period and is able to assign ACT resources for homework. See the recorded webinar for PLC number 2 for more about the ACT resources and what's available there. And finally, the last day of the week. Okay, and on the last day, what the teacher does is allocate time at the beginning of the period to talk about students' understanding of the ACT resources, and then spends the rest of the time presenting a lesson on volume of solids of revolution, and that finishes out week 1 for this particular teacher. A couple things to note about the schedule. This sample assumes a 55-minute period. That might be different for all of you. And you can make adjustments according to how long your periods are and how frequently you meet. Most performance tasks, yeah, they're about 3 activities. So rather using the performance task as a single activity, some teachers break them up. For instance, they may have a student do the first 2 activities in small groups during class and finish the rest for homework. That's an option that can help you save class time and will give students a chance to explore some of the content while you're all together. Notice, there's also a reflection piece built in after both of the instructional pieces and the assessment piece. That's important because you want to check about student struggles before giving the quiz, and then take time to address things that they might have missed after the quiz. All right. So here on this slide, we're going to take a look at the whole unit plan again, and you can see that the pattern of instruction, performance, task, assessment, and reflection continues, and the sequence of this instruction is up to the teacher. Oh, I flipped ahead too far. Okay. One of the things that's important to point out here is that after the building blocks are taught and assessed, there's also an instructional and assessment component at the challenge area level. This is where students start tying things together and looking at how the concepts are interwoven into more complex ideas. One way to do this is through the challenge area performance task. This assessment is also where the teacher has incorporated his or her own assessment items as part of the unit assessment. Also, it's important to note that this is approximately the same amount of time this teacher would have spent teaching area and volume anyway, about 2.5 weeks. In other words, building AP Insight resources into your calculus program doesn't really add time to your plan. In fact, it may actually reduce time down the road because it allows students to process what they misunderstand and provides targeted instruction and feedback to close those gaps. Okay, student reflections. Just a note about those. The Next Steps Guide is a helpful way for kids to process and reflect on what they missed on a quiz. It's a structured way to guide their thinking. It's a I lost my place here. It's a structured way to guide their thinking about what misconceptions they may still have, and it gives them some action steps they can take to help correct those misunderstandings. This whole process of reflection not only helps kids address content misunderstanding, but also gives them a model on how to reflect on their own learning, which is going to be an important skill for them later in college and career and so forth. Uh, okay, so here's what this looks like. Again, the link to the template is provided below, so I encourage you to check it out and incorporate it into your instruction cycle as much as possible. Okay, let's take a look at some of the things you might want to keep in mind if you're planning for the entire school year. Even though it's just February, or the end of February, I guess, some of the tips are applicable for getting ready for the AP exam. Also, since this is the last webinar in our series, we want everyone to be able to start the summer with some ideas of how to plan and map out using AP Insight for next year. Okay, we recommended starting off with a topic translation. That document, the topic translation document, is available on your AP Insight page. It's helpful. It's a helpful guide that outlines where AP Calculus topics are addressed in AP Insight. How do you get to the The way to get there is to go to the strategy sections and scroll down. Today, if you take a look at the sample, there's also a blank template available, and we put both of those links below. Okay, the topic translation. Right, the one we're going to be looking at is from Lindsay Bibler. Lindsay's a teacher at South Florence High School in Florence, South Carolina, and she's noteworthy for a number of reasons. She won a Millikan Prize and some other stuff, so she's a pretty noteworthy teacher. The topic translation provides an overview of how the building blocks and challenge areas map to course topics. This sample happens to align with one of our sample course planning guides, namely Lindsay's. This course planning and pacing guides posted on the course are also available on the page at AP Central. The structure is pretty easy to follow. It notes the name of the unit, the challenge area, and the building block being addressed. And the topics are part of that building block. Notice that the EKs from the curriculum guideline also show up in the right-hand column. As you can see how on this page, each of the building blocks happens to be addressed in sequence. Although, as we noted before, it doesn't necessarily have to be the case. You need to adapt them to how it will work best for you. Right? And those building blocks are followed by a row that addresses the culmination of those concepts in the challenge area courses. The blank topic translation, there's a link below, simply gives you a blank table that you can map your own syllabus in sequence if you wish. These are the building blocks. There. Okay, planning considerations. Remember that AP Insight was designed to allow flexibility for teachers. You know your students' needs best and what constraints you're working with at your particular teaching environment. If you're not sure whether you can use all the resources for an entire year, one option is to plan for the year, but then just start off with 1 or 2 units and see how it goes. Have a plan. Having a plan is better than not having one because without a plan, it won't happen at all. And we all know that over the course of the year, we run into all the time the tyranny of the urgent. You know, we have the administrator who calls that says this has to be done, or the assembly, or this or that or the other, all that sort of distract from our primary focus. All right, so planning ahead of time is a way of getting around that a little bit. If you're feeling overwhelmed by all the resources that are available, or you're needing to pick and choose the ones to use because you're limited for time, just keep in mind that it's important to incorporate a full cycle of resources. That means an entire building block from beginning to end, rather than just using the performance tasks or just using the quizzes. It's a system that hangs together and it provides a feedback loop, and each piece supports the other. So if you're going to adapt a package, I guess the strong recommendation is to adapt an entire piece of the package. To really identify and address student misunderstandings for a particular concept, the full cycle is, again, really important. Performance tasks help students explore the concepts and enable them to ask the questions that guide and build their understanding. The quizzes help to identify where they have specific gaps, and the feedback loop reports some actionable steps to the kids to help them close the gap. It is again most effective if you use this entire instructional feedback loop. And finally, uh, remember that the challenge area resources The performance tasks and the open-ended assessments are designed to help kids tie everything together and to see how the concepts can be applied in new contexts. So they'd be great to use for an end of the unit or an end of year review getting ready for the AP exam. And while the AP exam is coming up in May, the next couple of months would be a great opportunity to try to use some of these resources with your kids and to see how they might be incorporated into your instructional cycle for the remainder of the year and for next year. All right, let's pause for a couple of questions. What thoughts do you have?
Peter, would you mind going back one more slide, going back to where the list
Sure.
of questions were?
Yeah.
Okay, so one thing I wanted to add while folks are typing some things in the chat is that you know, and Peter touched on this earlier, that that even though it's February right now, right, and planning your like units and incorporating AP Insight or like thinking about a whole school year might not be on your radar right now, but this is our last presentation for AP Insight for this school year, and so we wanted to make sure that we sort of wove in some of those considerations before the year ended so that folks would have a chance to like process them and think about what it might look like for the next year, because the summer is going to come up at some point, and then you're going to have some time to like decompress and think about how you want to like change things up for next year. So we wanted to get some of this information out right now because that's going to come up soon, and also because as I said a second ago, that the AP exam is going to be around the corner really soon, and if nothing else, those like challenge area resources are designed to sort of be like culminating experiences for those topics. And so you might try like getting your feet wet with some of those things, like maybe give a performance task to your students, they could take it home with them, and you could like go over it in class, or you could do it as an in-class activity, because as we said, they're about 45 minutes each, and then follow it up with the challenge area assessment to sort of give students like a way to practice those skills,
Right.
all in the context of like in the instructional and feedback cycle. So it's like sort of giving them a taste of those like AP skills before they get to the actual exam, right? So the idea is like getting you used to like what does AP Insight look like for your students in your classroom, and then also giving them the exposure to what some of those questions might look like and what skills they're going to have to apply. And then you sort of have something to run with for next year, right? You at least have some like some small doses of things that you tried while you were in like AP review mode, and then you have some things that you can move forward with, like, oh, when I tried that last year, like this went well, and this thing I would tweak. So now you have a sense of like how you would incorporate that into your regular instructional plan. So then Aaron had a few comments on the chat box here. He says, I think planning for next year is going to be a point of emphasis. Yep, sure, exactly. Um, so yeah, that was a not an uncommon experience actually for a lot of teachers. Aaron was commenting that for some teachers just getting the ball rolling was tough. There's a lot of resources there. There's the setup stage of sort of getting your classes online and everything, and so from that point forward, then it's just sort of a mad rush through the school year, right? Like teachers know it's just like a bombardment of things. You're just inundated. And so it's totally understandable that you may just sort of be like warming up to the idea at this point. But the good news is that there's still like many weeks left in the year. It may not feel like that many are left, but there's still some weeks left. And some of that initial exposure could be helpful. I think your suggestion, Erin, is great about like suggesting to them to use the performance tasks or the challenge area as a review, and just remind them that there are also assessments that pair with those things that can help give teachers an idea of how their students are doing on those. And of course, there's release free response questions as well, so they can sort of like scaffold up to that point. They can use the challenge area assessments followed by like real FRQs from the AP exam. So there's just a lot of possibilities there, right, for helping students, or even just differentiating, right? It's like maybe some students get the challenge area stuff because they're trying to like build up those skills still. Maybe other students are ready to move on to the FRQs. There's like a lot of ways that could go, right?
Just looking at your comment about planning, Aaron, so maybe a natural time, I don't know what the schedule is at your particular schools, might be after AP exam, where I know at least in my school, after the exam, that AP Calc class is a little more relaxed. We'll go on some tangents, explore some other ideas. But it's also a time that I might be able to use to begin planning using AP Insight for next year. I can tell you that I looked at some of the resources, but this year, this is the first time we used it. I kind of felt like I was, building the plane as I was flying it. Not not uh, not always sort of the best way to do it, but to sit down and sort of map out that you have something, you have a something on a planning template that you can look back on and reflect on and to think about uh, while you're teaching the course itself. Because, as we said at the start of this PLC, once the school year is up and running, I mean, I know we're all terribly busy. We've got, what, 5 classes a day, or if you're on a block, maybe you've got 3, but most of your time is spoken for in one form or another. But to take any time you might have at the end of the school year, or even the course of the summer, to sketch out a rough plan, maybe even using some of the templates on AP Insight, is helpful. Yeah, unfortunately, we didn't get a whole lot of weather days up here in southeast Pennsylvania this year. I think we had one, but not a bad idea, Aaron.
Okay, so we can go ahead and transition over to our final set of discussion questions. We'll see if there's anything on there that we haven't tackled yet.
Okay. So here are our final discussion questions. One, how can you see yourself incorporating AP Insight resources in your instructional plan? Well, I'll jump in and answer that. I mentioned that we have a couple of AP Calc courses going, but I have one particular group that I'm running with AP Insight, and we're a school that is interesting to say the least. We've got both ends of the economic spectrum. But I can say that I haven't had an African American kid in a Calc class for my career at the current place I work. But this year, using AP Insight as a recruitment tool, I've got a class of 21. They kept it small. Uh, and I've got 6 kids who are African American kids and a bunch of other kids who would not have taken an AP Calculus course normally. We looked at some records. We individually sort of recruited these kids, and it's going. I mean, I've learned a lot this year. Things I'll change and run a little bit differently next year. But it was nice to see this population of kids who normally would not have taken AP Calculus take it and do okay at this point. And I'm expecting that they'll probably do okay on the exam. So that's been exciting for me. So we've taken this sort of part of the population that you normally haven't seen in AP Calculus, and hey, we've got a class that is 25%.
Thanks for sharing, Peter. I can speak to the like the development of the resources as
Hmm.
intentional about um, just being mindful, I guess, of students who are you know, interested and academically prepared and want to be part of those courses, but for whom like the doors aren't always open for them, and so we are, and that teachers don't always necessarily feel equipped to address whatever their spectrum of needs is. Right, classrooms are very diverse
Right.
settings for a whole lot of reasons, and so we were just really intentional about trying to design um, classroom activities and quizzes that would help to just really pinpoint
Right.
those roadblocks that, you know, once students are in the class, like what types of things do the students who aren't quite making a 3, like what is it that they typically get stuck on when they're on this unit or when they're on this topic, right? And then helping, like providing activities and resources that would help the teacher give like really targeted feedback for those students, so that that's no longer a roadblock, right? So that they can move on through the challenging and foundational content. And so, you know, the entire goal is to just help students be successful in APS, right? And just being mindful of like students who are representative of those underserved populations,
Right.
who we know could just really rock in those classes, and we just want to make sure that they have, you know, every chance to be successful at that. So we were uh, really focused on trying to make that content accessible for students, but also like recognizing the challenge for teachers. Also, I think, you know, Peter, when you were introducing the early slides,
Mm-hmm.
the design of the platform, it is about addressing things that are difficult for students, like that students struggle to learn, but also what teachers struggle to teach, right? When you think about calculus concepts, there's a lot of nuance
Right.
in that course, right? And it's also advanced math, right? We're talking about college level math being taught to high school students, usually seniors, but sometimes not, right? And so there's a there's a lot of pressure, like pedagogically speaking, to communicate really abstract things to that population, just high
Right.
schoolers. You know what I mean? Like getting it to a point where it's like easy for, you know, someone to like, you know, process and practice with, and make it just sort of like seem real to them. And it's hard to break down some of those concepts into things that like a high schooler is really gonna latch onto. And so that was something else we were trying to like keep in mind, that like this is tough for teachers to
Mm-hmm.
communicate those concepts, because math is already kind of this abstract thing, and a lot of students have baggage around it. It's like, I'm not good at math, or I was always told I was
Right.
a failure, it was never my thing, you know, that type of stuff. And what we're trying to do is help teachers have like a pre-understanding of what it is their kids will probably like struggle with when they get
Mm-hmm.
to those units, and sort of preemptively give them resources to address those things. So there's like several stages built into AP Insight, from instruction to assessment and then follow up on assessment, where it's
Mm-hmm.
like at any point where a gap is identified, there's something the teacher can give the student, or explain in a different way, or help them practice with, that just really gets to like the granular level of helping them like understand what thing they're missing. Um,
Yeah.
so it's kind of, you know, it's exciting to be able to like talk to other teachers about what's there, because there's nothing like this that exists that I know of for other things. And so we're you know, we were just excited to be able to like offer it. Oh, Aaron has a comment here. He said, one teacher expressed a concern that transcendentals are incorporated through many topics. True. And the Larson text doesn't teach transcendentals until later on. Also true. How do I encourage them to still use the resources? Wow, what a great question. Uh, Peter, do you mind? I have a couple thoughts on that. Do you mind if I?
Go for it.
Okay. So yeah, so that's a great question. The here's how I would respond to those teachers, because you're right. Like that's sort of a that's one of those like preference sets. Like some teachers are going to have early transcendentals, some teachers are going to approach it with late transcendentals, and believe it or not, that was kind of a struggle that we had on the committee that was working to develop these resources. It's like which set of teachers are we making these resources for, right? Excuse me, the ones who teach it early or the ones who teach it late. And what we sort of came around to was that in for the resources that that we ended up developing, it it kind of, I don't want you to take this the wrong way. Like the way I'm going to say, it kind of doesn't matter. I realize I'm saying I know it matters, but like, but the beauty of the resources is that they're actually like things you can like pull apart. You can there are things available on the site that will let you know like what is incorporated into that particular building block or challenge area, like what some of the expectations are going to be for students and the learning objectives. So teachers could look ahead and see what's coming or what's involved with that building block and either like hold on it, right? They don't have to teach it right then if they are um, like if they're not going to get to transcendentals until later, then that's something they could revisit, right? They could use that tool, even though that particular resource might have been built for like someone doing early transcendentals. That teacher could just use that resource later once they've done transcendentals. So the resource allocations are like fluid. Like when we talked about flexibility for teachers, like they can incorporate it at whatever point in their curriculum where it's now appropriate to give to the students. So it may not be like super fresh where it's like, oh, I just taught this and now you guys are going to practice it, but that's okay, because it almost better even, I would argue, because now you're giving them practice with something you did maybe a couple months ago, and now they have to sort of like revisit it in new ways, right? And they have to sort of like pull back up those concepts rather than just sort of burying it deep and it's like, oh, we did that back in October type of thing. Exactly, spiraling. So that's something I would encourage for folks. And also another thing I could recommend is sometimes you can also split the performance tasks. This is specifically for the instructional things. Of course, the assessments are a little harder to break apart because they're just sort of a package thing. But the performance tasks are generally like 3 mini activities within that like 45-minute chunk. So you could have them do, say, like just the intro activity of that performance task, and then just hold off on doing the second and third activities until you've covered that content also. So those aren't necessarily like all or nothing type of thing. You could break those up also.
And Aaron, I'm also trying to think back at the challengers that I've looked at and used, and I'm trying to remember if that was a significant issue, and I'm thinking I don't think it really was. Maybe a little bit adaptation here and there, but the challengers, I think of it, they're about concepts. The particular functions. Well, yeah, I mean they come into play here and there, but I don't know that that was really an issue as I worked through the challenge areas with my kids.
I agree. And so I'm actually also just going to pull up this pod real quick because it has the list of the challenge areas on it.
Mhm.
And I remember in conversations when we were developing the resources that it was mostly this one right here, what we would call like, oops, I'm sorry, the second challenge area, understanding and calculating derivatives. Because of course,
Right. Of
if you
course, yeah.
haven't covered, yeah, if you haven't covered your transcendentals yet, then when you do some of those resources, like that's sort of where the resources belong, like concept wise, but that doesn't mean that's where you have to address them like teaching wise, right? So that's what I meant by like revisiting it. If you wait and do sort of this, let's call it the second challenge area later, then just do those resources later, right? But you can still teach it in whatever sequence you want. But I think that may be the only one, if not just one of the very few, as Peter was
Right.
saying, that where it really comes into play in the way that you're describing. I think just that's
Tiffany, I wanted to address something we were talking about a little earlier. I would say about this particular insight group that I have at my school, it's about the math. I want them to know the math. They have to know the calculus to do well in the AP exam and all of that. That is the critical piece of it. But I will say that this group, maybe more so than some other calculus classes, has felt sort of enveloped in the support. They felt good about it. There was a sense like, okay, it's not going to let me fall, you know. So I think it built a pretty positive attitude.
That's great. Well, we only have a few minutes left, so I think we can go on. I just have a couple of closing slides, and then we'll ask you guys to fill out a really quick survey for us that will help us know sort of what areas we could address in the future. Um, of course, if you have any questions for us, like I said, we still have a few minutes left, so feel free to throw those over into the chat
Sure.
section. Um, Okay, so we just have um, a quick reminder here that there is actually an online community discussion board
Mhm.
where only AP Insight calculus teachers have access. You log into the main homepage just like you normally would, and all the way on the right there's a menu option that says discussions, and that brings you to this page that's called our Share What Works page. And there are like occasional posts by our moderators, highlighted right there, Margarita. So sometimes like she'll ask for like suggestions, what are people doing with this challenge area, or what are some ways that you're adapting things for your classroom. Sometimes other people just post ideas or questions, and so that's a forum that you can go to that's always available for you to sort of check in with other people who are in your same boat. So like Aaron, you were talking about being sort of in the more of like the administrative position of helping bring people on board, and this might be a place to direct teachers to as like hey, here's a resource that's available all year, and our moderator is also very responsive. So if you reached out to her directly on that board, like she would respond to that also and answer questions. And all those teachers use AP Insight in their own classrooms. And so here we are at the end. If you have questions that relate to the platform or your login or privileges or anything related to the site, we have a dedicated email address, apinsight@collegeboard.org, that provides support and answers questions. And what we have below the screen is a survey link, and I think it takes about like 2 or 3 minutes altogether. If you guys wouldn't mind clicking on that survey link, I can also put it in the chat box. Let's see. Here we go. There's a survey link. It's through SurveyMonkey. It's completely anonymous, and just asking for some quick feedback on this presentation, and also like what things you'd like to see addressed in future presentations, like going into next school year. And both Peter and I will stay on for a few minutes in case anything else comes up. And if we don't hear back from you, then we just really thank you for joining us this evening.